Hey 7th graders, Mr. Chamberlain here with your first video lesson for the week of May 25th, 2020. I hope you guys had a nice Memorial Day, and we are going to continue on with our unit on East and Southeast Asia. Our first lesson is going to look at the government systems and some of the cultural aspects of the countries in this part of the world. So let's start with the government systems first. China has a communist government. There are a few other countries in this part of the world that also have a communist government, Vietnam, for example. Communism is very different than what we're used to here in the United States. So the idea behind communism is that the government owns everything. And they own all business, and people are the workers. And so you are going to work, the government collects all the profits, and they're supposed to spread those profits equally among the people. However, that's not the way it always works. A lot of times in communist governments, you have the government becomes very strong, and they start to limit people's rights. And you see that a lot in Chinese culture. For example, the freedom of speech. Chinese citizens do not have the freedoms of speech that we have here in the United States. You can get in trouble for saying things or talking out against the government. It was really bad under the rule of Mao Zedong when he was the communist dictator there. They also don't have the freedom of press, so everything that is released out to people through news media, whether that's TV, newspapers, or radio stations, is controlled by the government. So the government only puts out things that they want people to hear. A good example of this was back in 1989, right outside the Forbidden City, which is that complex. It has the picture of Mao Zedong you probably have seen pictures of before. There's an area called Tiananmen Square, and there was a protest that lasted for a long time. And it kept growing, and it was a pro-democracy protest where people were saying they wanted a democracy in China. And as the protests got larger and larger and larger, the Chinese government said enough of this, and they rolled in the military with tanks, and hundreds of protesters who were unarmed were killed to kind of shut down the demonstration. And today in China, they don't even talk about this day anymore. They don't teach about it in schools. They kind of pretend like it never happened. This is the famous image from it. It's called Tank Man. And it shows the tanks kind of rolling at this guy holding a bag of groceries just to kind of show the defiance towards the government. The internet is also heavily regulated in China. So you cannot go on the internet in China and search words like freedom or democracy. Those sites are blocked because they don't want people living there to know what those things are. Japan has a different type of a government. They have what's called a constitutional monarchy. This should be familiar to you. We talked about this with Great Britain as well. So during World War II, Japan had been very aggressive at trying to take over the Pacific part of the world. And after World War II was over and they were defeated, they were forced to change their type of government. So they had always had an emperor in charge of their country. And like the Queen of England, they still have an emperor, which is a monarch, but they don't have any real political power. They're just kind of like a ceremonial figurehead. They have a parliament, which they call the Diet, and a prime minister that run the country. So that's what a constitutional monarchy is, and that's what Japan has. South Korea has a government very similar to the United States. As a matter of fact, they modeled their constitution after our constitution. So the freedoms there that the people have are very similar to what we're used to here in the United States. North Korea has a communist dictatorship. We will talk more about North Korea in lesson number 2, so I'm going to kind of glance over that one for now. So there are many different types of government systems in this part of the world, and people there have a lot of different freedoms depending on where they live. Let's talk about Hong Kong for a second. Hong Kong is a province of China, but the people there have different rights than the people in the rest of China. And the reason is, for 150 years, Hong Kong was ruled by Great Britain. They had won Hong Kong in a war against China, and it was under their rule until the late 1990s. And so as China changed into a communist government in the 1950s, Hong Kong was still part of Great Britain. So the people that lived in Hong Kong had a lot of freedoms that the rest of the people in China didn't have. Well, in the late 1990s, it went back to Chinese control, and it was kind of a weird adjustment because the rest of China was ruled one way, and the people of Hong Kong were still given a lot of those rights. There have been, before the coronavirus hit, there were a lot of protests over the past year in Hong Kong because they felt like their rights were slowly being taken away and restricted to be more like the rest of China. All right, let's take a few minutes and talk about some cultural aspects of East and Southeast Asia. So a lot of cool cultures in this part of the world. Let's start with China. So China, under their communist government, does not technically allow the practice of religion. There are people there that will practice Buddhism, kind of privately, but the communist leaders kind of think if you're going to be worshiping anyone, it should be the communist leaders of that country. So that's been the way it's been taught in the past. So like many other communist countries, religion is kind of forbidden. Buddhism is practiced in many countries in Southeast Asia, and in the country of Japan you have Shinto, and Taoism is another religion that is also practiced in East and Southeast Asia. As far as China, China's got their own system of writing. They actually have a couple different styles of it, and their writing is much different than the writing that we have here in the United States. So in the United States we have 26 letters in our alphabet. Now China has these really, really cool symbols that they use for their writing. They don't have an alphabet. Each character stands for either a word or a sound. So they have a character that stands for the word man, or moon, or horse, or woman, and they don't kind of spell it out. They have others that kind of represent sounds that they can string together to put words together. So to become literate in Chinese, you have to memorize and learn thousands of different characters, where in English you have to learn 26 letters to form all the different words. So that's kind of a different system of writing. If you look at Korean, it looks very similar to Chinese writing. However, there was a ruler of Korea many, many years ago who said and kind of ordered someone to come up with a simpler form of writing. So although it looks like Chinese, they actually do have a limited number of characters. There's 20-something characters in Korean, so that one's a little bit easier to learn. The Chinese are credited for coming up with a lot of inventions that we use in our everyday life. So here's a list of some inventions from China. We have toilet paper, which was like gold a few months ago, compass, gunpowder, printing, paper, kites, ice cream, noodles, the crossbow, the toothbrush, and wigs are some different inventions from China. Some popular activities in Chinese culture include stamp collecting, ping pong, or what some of us call table tennis, Tai Chi. Every morning a lot of people gather in the streets together in groups to do Tai Chi. Tai Chi is a very slow, methodical martial art that works on flexibility and health. It's gaining popularity in the United States as well. Many different forms of martial arts are popular in China and other places in East Asia. And the last game I want to mention to you is called Mahjong, which is like a Chinese dominoes type of a game. You can see a picture of it here. Now, Japan has got some cool cultural aspects to it as well. One of their most popular sports there is called sumo wrestling. Baseball is also very popular in Japan. It's an American pastime, but it's caught fire in Japan, and their games are televised with large audiences. Many Japanese women wear this traditional silk robe. It's called a kimono. And of course we know about sushi, which is a type of food that's served in Japan that is also very popular here in the United States. Another part of Japanese culture that's popular here in the United States is called origami. Origami is learning how to fold paper into different objects. Typically we would do a samurai helmet, so we're going to actually do that during a Google Meet this week. If you can join me, we'll do that on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Korean culture is gaining popularity in the United States as well. We call that cultural diffusion. Recently there's been a band over the past several years that's become very popular called BTS. They are a K-pop group. I know my daughter's a big fan of them, so that's an example of cultural diffusion. Several years ago there was another Korean pop star that was very popular over here. He had a one-hit wonder called Gangnam Style. His name was Psy. So Korean culture is gaining popularity over here in the United States too. Alright, so those are some cultural aspects of East and Southeast Asian countries that I wanted to talk about with you today. Make sure you check out assignment number 1, and I'll be back with lesson number 2, which is about North Korea, which is one of the most unique topics and interesting topics that we'll talk about this year. So make sure you check it out. Have a great week, everybody.